Hello, Year 12. This is a screencast to help you prepare with one of the essay topics that we will be looking at over the course of the first few weeks of Term 3. The topic that I've chosen has been taken from the VCAR practice exam for 2017. Now remember, the 2017 study design is new for Year 12, so this is the first time that they've done comparative in Year 12 on the exam. So we are figuring it out as we go within the teaching staff. So hopefully we're on the right track. But I will preface this screencast by saying that comparative essay writing is something that I'm continuing to work on and bat away at, and I'm practicing and writing different bits and pieces because I just feel like these are two enormous texts that you can write big essays about each of them, let alone the way that you compare them. And I'm worrying about whether we are comparing in a way that's quite shallow as opposed to a kind of deep and meaningful way. And this is something that's really causing me a bit of stress when I'm writing or trying to plan out essays. So, but Miss Handos told me just pull off the band-aid and have a crack. So here we go. Trust in oppressive societies. Now, this prompt, as I've said before, came from the VCAR 2017 practice exam. And it says, in oppressive societies, there is little possibility for trust. Just a general statement, and then the question. What do these texts suggest about the nature of trust? So the first thing that I'm looking at, I'm thinking the two oppressive societies that they're talking about is obviously Oceania, which is inspired by Hitler, and that is Orwell's creation. It's a fictional dystopian environment or regime. So it is the very kind of end of the spectrum, the worst it could possibly be in terms of oppressive societies. And then you have the former GDR, which is explored in Funda's text, and the way that she looks at the Stasi as a force within an oppressive society. So you would need to consider how they oppress, the ways in which they oppress. So we're going to look at that. Little possibility, which means, it's hopeless, improbable, there's a very slim chance, it's very unlikely. So within these societies, the structures, the means, the methods that they employ to control and manage their people, or to suppress their people, there's a synonym for you, it means that there is little possibility, a little chance for trust to exist. So what I'm going to look at is trust in relationships, be that intimate, family, friends, neighbors, etc. Some synonyms for trust include fidelity, which is the same as loyalty, commitment to, or confidence in. So there's some of the terms that I would want to be peppering throughout my essay. I don't just want to be using the word trust. If at this point you haven't written this prompt down and you haven't done a bit of a brainstorm around it, I would suggest that you pause, write it, underline the keywords, and start making some notes just in general on this topic. What do these texts suggest? So I'm going to be, for me, I want to think about authorial intent. What are Funda or Funda, whatever you want to say, trying to suggest, Funda and Orwell, about oppressive societies and what relationship they have to the concept of trust, or the nature of trust. And the nature of trust means the essential qualities, or what elements make up trust. And it's about the kind of features that you have within these relationships, which we're going to explore more. And again, there's some synonyms for trust. So complete confidence in a person or idea. And the absence of trust means, for me, the absence of safety for some people. So you need to think about how to not trust means to feel unsafe. So we need to think about who they're trusting, why they're trusting them, and what that says about the reality of trust in these oppressive societies. Do they trust their family, their friends, their relations, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their partner, etc.? Or do they only trust the government because that is how they've been conditioned to behave? The psychology of the regime means that the only person or thing that they trust is their oppressor, is their ruler. Right, there's some ideas, but we need to break that down into 3 paragraphs. So, the 3 that I was thinking of was totalitarian regimes and the ways in which they use surveillance and informers to maintain their power and assert control. So, how do these 2 regimes assert total control, and what relationship does this have to trust? As in, you've got telescreens, you've got the Stasi. What impact do these means and methods have on our ability to trust other people? Are the 2 texts similar? Are they different? So what you can do is pause now, and you can do number 1, totalitarian regimes, surveillance and informers, as a kind of subheading. And underneath that, I want you to have a little look at the text and see if you can find 2 examples, one from each text, about how the governments assert control, and subsequently what impact this has on trust. So actually, you probably want 2 examples from each text. One about asserting control. The second one should be about what the consequence of that is in terms of trust for each text. Once you've done that, you can come back and we'll do the second one. So the second thing I'm thinking of is, yes, the GDR and the thought police, or in Oceania, there is an attempt by the party and Big Brother to assert control, to surveil and inform. However, you have this sense of resistance, the formation of love, connection, relationships, bonds, trust between individuals, in spite of all that's going on before them. So I think that my second paragraph, I'd be thinking about what are the ways, or how do these relationships come about, in that they are resisting these measures of control and these methods of control. So again, subheading is love, connection, bonds, trust. Come up with a couple of examples. I'm going to have some over here in a moment, but you can have a little think, come up with some of your own. And the reason that I say pause and come up with some of your own is because it is good to think outside the box, and it's also good to challenge yourself, to familiarize yourself with the text, to flick through it and find some of your own examples, because this is the way that you separate yourself from other people in the exam, by having a very good knowledge of both texts and being able to pick not the most obvious example or the most obvious quote, because you can use Miriam and Charlie, for example, would be a common coupling that people are going to talk about. But if you can talk about quotes that aren't the most obvious, they're a little bit left of field, but they still say what you want, then you are going to separate yourself from other students. Remember, there's 40,000 people sitting this English exam. You need to make yourself stand out. And in the same thing, there's 25, 26, 27 of you in our classes. Make yourself stand out. Get original people. All right, the third one. I want to think about authorial intent, and that is, what are Funder and Orwell trying to say? What's their lesson, and what are they trying to say about how, yes, they've got these surveillance measures and they're trying to control people. That doesn't always work out, because we see some relationships form. However, in the end, are there times where trust is misplaced? And as such, what is the lesson that Funder and Orwell are trying to give us when this trust is misplaced? And what I'm thinking about there is when, in the end, Winston declares that he loves Big Brother. He loves his oppressor. He loves O'Brien. Why is that, and what is Orwell trying to tell us? So, these are my broad ideas. And so we've got Stasi-Land. I'm thinking the Black Channel, and you've got von Schnitzler for that. The Stasi, you can look at Herr Bock and the recruitment method for informers, again in the same area. The Free German Youth, the way that they use children to spy and kind of permeate all aspects of society. Then you've got the telescreens, which are inside all of the inner and outer parties' homes, constantly streaming and recording what's going on both ends. The thought police, who are hidden amongst society. So, for example, Mr. Charrington is a member of the thought police, but we like Winston, did not know that, and in some senses trusted him in the same way that we trust O'Brien, because we are kind of deceived into that. And then you have the young spies, so again, children. So these are quite similar. I think this paragraph would be about comparing what's similar in the way that these two totalitarian regimes operate. You might make a comment at the end about the success or otherwise of that in terms of drawing a contrast at the end of your paragraph. The second one could be love and connection. I'm thinking about Hagen Kosh and his wife and the story of their he being locked up, the divorce papers, then the remarrying at the end, which suggests that in the end the party didn't really succeed, and Julia and Winston. And I might not go so far as to talk about the ending of the book because I'd probably leave that for here, but the fact that despite everything that was going on, they found each other and they formed the relationship they did suggests that like there is some sense of hope for humanity and potential for us to trust in one another because of the love that they find in quite horrific kind of living conditions. All right, we're looking now at the final paragraph. So authorial intent, funder, and Orwell's message or lesson for the audiences. Now, the key thing that I am concerned about in this paragraph is the idea that yes, they are trying to assert control. Yes, there is some resistance in the formation of connection and love, but ultimately there is, for a number of characters, a misplacing of trust within these authoritarian states. And you've got, Winston declares his love for Big Brother at the end, and characters like Hagen Kosh and there's a couple of other gentlemen that I'm thinking of that I'm going to have to come back to in the Stasi land, who still have this love for the party and this kind of glorified version of what they think the past was. And even in the end, Hagen Kosh has this love for and trust of the wall and what it did for him. It defined him because of his participation in drawing the line. And Funder's commentary, as well as Orwell's, suggests that the abuse of power can lead to this mistrust, and this is something that we need to be wary of. This is a lesson for power unchecked. If we let governments treat citizens this way and create this kind of psychology where people in the end love the people who suppress them and squash them down and oppress them, then that is a dangerous future and it's something to be wary of. And I think in 2017, you have that lesson in potentially the presidency of Donald Trump, who people are afraid is being quite ridiculous and in turn suppressing opposition to his party through throws out fake news and things like that. And as a result, people kind of adore him and love him for all that he's doing, when really, if they got down to the nuts and bolts of are they better off or how they're being treated by the government under his leadership, they might see that things are different to what they're believing. So yes, that's a bit off track, but it's something to think about in how it applies to today. And you might say readers in the present day are encouraged to consider, because this was produced in 1948 approximately, and he is saying, having a lesson about Hitler and kind of Nazism and the psychology of fear that went on there and how it became such a powerful regime. And you can say that lesson transcends a date and time, and it's still relevant today, especially in the 21st century, for readers who are consuming it right now, as much as Stasi-land still has many lessons for us to learn. So I've just got the criteria here, but I believe Mrs. Hando talks about it a bit more in hers, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but briefly touch on what a very high would look like. And it's talking about the sophisticated understanding of the text and how they convey ideas, issues, and themes from different perspectives. So, as I noted before, sophisticated understanding means that you have a very good grasp of both texts. You're able to quote a range of different examples, and again, not the most obvious, and then you are talking about them in a way that shows that you understand the significant and important connections where there is similarity, but also where there is difference, so points of contrast. Sustained and insightful. Again, I don't think we're going to have a problem with sustained. These two texts lend themselves to large analysis, but what we are going to have to work on, and this will come through your drafting, is insightful comparisons. You need to be concise and at the same time writing in a bit of detail to get that kind of insightful comparison when you've got two big texts, and you have to narrow it down. There's so many ideas, you just need to pick and choose what you're going to talk about in each of your essays depending on the topic. Considered use of textual evidence, so it's the right kind of quotes to support the analysis that you're making, you're embedding them within your responses, etc. Skillful control of the features, this is the use of comparative language, moving between the two texts. And, I don't think you have to be constantly going one text back and forward 3 or 4 times in a paragraph, but I think you can hint subtly in, say, you talk about 1984 for most of the first half of a paragraph, but in the second half you do your transition sentence into Stasi land, and then you continue to talk about Stasi land, just making little brief hints at, in the same way that Winston so too does Dieter Behrens, which would be Julia's father, and you would talk about how he's similar to Winston and whatever you've talked about in the first half of the paragraph. Highly expressive, fluent, and coherent. I would suggest that the way I'm speaking in this podcast isn't those things, but through written expression, drafting, you will all be able to improve in this area. No doubt it comes with drafting. All right, a brief introduction. You need to have an orientation, you need to list your 3 arguments, and you need to have a linking sentence. Sometimes in here you will have a response to the prompt. I haven't included that in this piece because I sort of got straight into my arguments, which I think are a response to the prompt. And also, given the depth of the paragraphs that I want to write, I'm looking for a shorter introduction. So that's why this is the way it is. You can pause and read this if you like. I'm just going to move on forward though to save time. All right. Argument 1, I'm going to talk about totalitarian regimes. So I've got a bit of a topic sentence here. Now these are not perfect, but they're a starting point. Both Stasi-Land and 1984 demonstrate how totalitarian regimes attempt to eradicate trust between individuals, and in doing so seek allegiance, which means loyalty to the government alone. Orwell's text warns, so that's about what it's suggesting, of the ways in which governments pursuing power might systematically fracture individual loyalties through the manipulation of reality and truth. So I'm going to spend, so this is my kind of intro to my first text. I'm going to spend the first half of my paragraph honing in on 1984. I'm going to talk about what the telescreens mean and their role in undermining people's kind of sense of safety and their trust, because they feel there is nothing they can do that is not seen or known. The fear that the thought police might be embedded anywhere within society and whomever they meet, the constant kind of suspicion of people around them. And then young spies, the breakdown of loyalty between even parents and children, because the children work for the state and they do not have an allegiance to their family as such. Now, this is obviously quite a few page references. You are going to narrow it down and see how much you can talk about. In probably for this paragraph, you're looking at the space of around 300 words, up to 400, I suppose. I'm just thinking, hold on. No, around 300 is probably what you're looking at. So you might choose 1 or 2 of these and zone in on those. You might not talk about all 3. I've got a number of page references. My versions are the 1984 one is the one with the blue and white cover. I think it's the penguin one. And the Stasi-Land one is the one with the girl on the front cover, but I think they're all the same. The second half of the paragraph, I'm going to transition over and I'm going to say, in the same way, and depending where I touch off on, if I'm going to talk about the telescreens and the bruising, if I'm ending on that, say the bruising of ears, then I would switch into the black channel and say how they're similar and then go on and talk about another element. If I was talking about the thought police, I might switch into the Stasi, the young spies, I'd talk about the Free German Youth next. So depending where you end your analysis of kind of 1984 on, you can switch over to Stasi land on one of those three areas. Again, a number of page references there, and you can pick and choose from there what you like in terms of speaking about 1, 2, 3 of these areas. Now, as I said before, you need to be coming back, say in your second half, if that's the way you want to do it, to how 1984 is similar or different. So maybe you might say something like when you're moving from black channel to Stasi and you're talking about the ways that the government's trying to eradicate trust and between individuals and seek allegiance to the government. You might say, in the same way that the thought police undermine people's sense of safety within their working environment and social environment, so too do the Stasi and their informers who are hidden within society, da, 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 da. So you're drawing these little contrasts throughout your paragraph rather than, say, going back and forward, talking about telescreens and black channel, then going back to the 1984 and talking about the thought police and then the Stasi and informers and then back to 1984 young spies and back to Stasi land. I prefer, and it's totally my preference, but you can decide how you want to do it. It's not a hard and fast rule. Would be to do 1984 first for a chunk and then move into Stasi land and do some little weaves in the second half back to 1984. All right, so take from that what you like. I'll make these slides available underneath, so just check out the link. Argument 2, love and connection. In spite of the oppressive states of Oceania and the GDR, both texts depict individuals who exhibit extraordinary courage and resilience through the formation of personal relationships. It is through these connections that Orwell's characters and Funder's interviewees seek to maintain individual loyalty in the face of intimidation, interrogation, and in some cases, torture. So I would be talking about Julia and Winston, the formation of their relationship, knowing that we were dead, yet still forming that bond and having the affair up in the shop above, or the room above Mr. Charrington's shop. And I might even think about talking about why this is extraordinarily courageous and resilient in the context of the party and what they were trying to do. So you could talk about the duty to the party and the relationship that he had with Catherine before, and how this contrasts with the relationship that he has with Julia in the middle of the text. And then you might say you need to draw a contrast. And these are not exactly similar. Like Hagen Kosh and his wife's relationship is not in the same way as Julia and Winston. The fear and intimidation that they faced appears far more terrifying and intense than what is seen in Stasi land. So that might be the point that you make when you transition from 1984 to Stasi land. You might say the intensity that is faced by these two individuals and the absolute terror at being found out or being caught is not matched in Stasi land, but similar attempts or more kind of, you want to say something like softer example can come in the form of Hagen Kosh and his wife. These are two key chapters, but then I've broken it down here in terms of like the evolution of this betrayal, or sorry, not this betrayal, but the formation of this relationship. He married a woman who, because she was beautiful, not because of her party ties, this was an issue because he was supposed to be the socialist man, the perfect kind of poster boy for socialism. As a result of some decisions that he makes, he is jailed and threatened. His wife is intimidated and coerced, and he feels like he's been betrayed because he is a man who believes in documents. And you can talk about here, the trust he had is misplaced in these documents or is confused with these documents. However, in the end, the failure of the GDR is revealed because he remarries his wife and proves that in the end, freedom and humanity triumph, and the totalitarianism and oppression of the Stasi fails. So, still courage and resilience going on between these two. And then you need to draw it back together at the end with a kind of linking sentence. And I would save this bit here, this he's a man who believes in documents, and I would move it to the end and use it as a link forward. And you could talk about how Hagen Kosch's belief in the documents shows how some people misplace their trust, and in his case, trusted a document over his own natural instinct, which he thought his wife wouldn't betray him, but he had to believe that she did because of the document that she signed. So I would link forward with that example. All right, final one. We're going to talk about how love and trust can be misplaced when they're compelled to love their oppressor. 1984 again does this with the 2 minutes hate. You've got Winston who loves O'Brien. Throughout the text, there's this ongoing little obsession with him, thinking that he's kind of the salvation and a member of the Brotherhood who has a kind of common understanding and a kindred kind of spirit for Winston, who is very intelligent, as is O'Brien, and that kind of shared intellectualism is something that draws those two together. And we, the reader, are also kind of sucked into believing that O'Brien is a good person or a person to be trusted, but in the end, he's not, and we see the kind of why it's misplaced and the confusion that occurs because of that misplaced love. When O'Brien has him captured and is causing him immense pain, and as soon as he stops, Winston says, I loved him, I've never loved him more. And these are some references here. And we can see how it's called Stockholm Syndrome, when you begin to love the people that oppress you. So you can have a little look at that. And then in the end, kind of a sense of hopelessness because he's a broken man, because he misplaced his love and trust, and he was deceived and manipulated into giving up on kind of Julia and betraying her. And so in the end, Orwell's suggesting that if we don't stand up and prevent this kind of inhumanity, this vast surveillance that allows them to betray you and manipulate you into loving something that is so kind of disgusting and bad for you, which is Big Brother and the party, then we have no hope for humanity if we can't stand up to that. So that's kind of Orwell's lesson. We need to be wary of unchecked power. If we let it go too far, it's our own fault and we will suffer the consequences. However, Stasi-Land's message is kind of a bit more hopeful, as you can tell on the final page. The light, the park's a nice place, etc. But it's also hopeful in the way that Funder is able to build these trusting relationships with these individuals and conduct these interviews and share their stories for other people. And she's able to do this simply, I think, because she is an outsider. However, her interviews show the complex nature of the trust that exists not only during the time of the GDR, but in the years after, and the way that, for example, Hagen Kosch continued to obsess in his kind of love for the wall. He can't let it go. And also Julia Behrens, with the end of the wall came the end of her personal security, and she has a kind of messed up understanding of what a healthy kind of trusting relationship is, because her kind of compass or her, I don't even know what the right word is, but it was destroyed really in the closing down of the GDR and the events that happened around that time to her. And therefore, both Hagen Kosch and Julia Behrens show how we can misplace our trust because of various events. But despite this, Funder kind of ends on a hopeful note for humanity, that we can learn from this and that the Germany would recover from the history that was the GDR. So this paragraph, I'm just going to end on a note, is one that I've struggled with, and I'm still not 100% happy with it, so you can take it as you like. Feel free to play around, pick some different ideas, but it's there for you to get going with anyway. All right, what else have we got? Conclusion. 1984 and Stasiland challenge readers to consider, link back to the prompt about the nature of trust. Orwell's novel, A Fictitious Dystopian Warning, illustrates how totalitarian regimes attempt and are often successful in eradicating trust between individuals. He creates a world where people are spied upon not only by telescreens but also by their very own children to stamp out personal loyalties, where in the end relationships are crushed so people remain loyal to the party. Possibly this is too long, so you might want to get rid of that sentence. In a similar way, Funder presents to us a world in which relationships are monitored and attempts are made to destroy those that do not align with party policy. However, Stasiland differs from 1984 in the way that, and again, draw it back to the prompt, one is more hopeful, I think, in terms of the nature of trust and the possibility to trust in future. And I think Funder is optimistic about the potential for them to build a trusting society and to reform those relationships and to recover. But Winston, not so much. If you are kind of drawing your line at the end of Winston's story, which is he loved Big Brother, the end. All right, there's a sample introduction. I'm going to leave that off because it's not exactly right because I've played around with this screencast a bit, but have a look at the slides below. Good luck. If you've got any questions, I might have my thoughts on paragraph 3 a bit more sorted by next week, so come and see me. Any and all feedback is welcome. Good luck.